What's going on, everyone? Ben DiBono here for another foray into the Summa Theologica. If you hear chainsaws in the background, I apologize. My neighbor has been going at it for about 2 days now. I think he's cutting down the whole forest. But, what are you going to do? Life goes on. Chainsaws or not, right? There's some wisdom not even found in the Summa Theologica. Anyway, here we are, Treatise on the Angels. We are looking at question 54 today. First in this subsection on their intellect, and so we're going to look at the knowledge of the angels, which as these tend to go, this one's just kind of general introduction. A lot of it is kind of looking at what is the angelic intellect, what is it not. Yeah, you'll see. It's all that sort of good stuff. So 5 articles today. Kicking it off with number 1, whether an angel's act of understanding is his substance. 3 objections. Substance of an active intellect is its own action. Angels are higher and simpler than the active intellect of the soul. Therefore, their act of understanding is their intellect. Aristotle says the action of the intellect is life. We take life in this case to mean essence. So far as an angel understands his essence, the act of understanding and the thing understood are the same. Okay? But the action of a thing differs from its substance to a greater degree than the thing's existence differs from its substance. Okay, that's a little confusing. I tried to make it clear. I'm not sure I succeeded. I'm pretty sure I didn't. Basically what he's saying is that there's always going to be a greater degree of difference between the substance of a thing and that thing's actions, or will, or whatever we want to call that, and that thing's existence and substance. So, for action to be the same as substance, in this case the act of understanding, we would also have to say that the angel's existence is their substance, and if we've been paying attention to the Summa, we know that that belongs to God alone. Therefore, an angel's act cannot be his substance. Okay? For an angel's act to be his substance, he would have to be pure act. God alone is pure act, right? Go back to Treatise on the One God, way back when. If an angel's act was its substance, it would be a subsisting being, which, again, going back to that, God alone is, and would be indistinguishable from God's substance. That's not the case, so these claims fail. All right, objections answered. The active intellect is said to be its own action, not essentially, but concomitantly. I had to look that one up. Essentially just means, well, here, I still got the tab open. It just means naturally accompanying or associated. Thanks, Google. So, yeah. Not sure what the difference would be between that and accidentally, but we'll roll with it. Number 2, life is sometimes substituted for essence in language, but that is not technically correct in this sense. For angels, the act of self-understanding is brought about by a union between their intellect and the object of understanding. Those aren't the same, and we're just going to take Aquinas' word for that. All right. Number 2, whether in the angel to understand is to exist. So, kind of a similar one. All right, it's not its substance. So, essentially we're dealing with 3 things. We're dealing with the act of understanding, the existence, and then substance or essence in these first 2. So, not the same as substance. What about is it the same as the existence? Aristotle again. To understand is in a sense to live. Therefore, in an angel, to understand is to exist. The form by which an angel exists is the same form he uses to understand himself. Okay. Dionysius says that an angel's act of understanding is his movement. To exist is not movement. Fair enough, I guess. In no creature is the creature's action its existence. God alone is simply infinite, making his act of understanding his existence. So again, we're kind of falling back on stuff we talked about in the treatise on the one God, and it's just kind of coming at it now from the other side, as we've seen Aquinas do a number of times on a number of issues. But essentially, way back when, we talked about all this stuff with God. and the conclusion was reached that that belonged to God and belonged to God alone. And so now we're kind of just coming back from that from the other side, talking about angels. All right, objections answered. Number one, Aristotle is using life not to mean existence, but to mean an action which shows a thing to be living. So what he's saying is that all Aristotle means there is that when you look at a rock and it doesn't move, that's proof, or at least evidence, that it's not alive. When you look at a dog and it's moving, that would be evidence that it is alive. All right, the angel uses his form to understand, yet that form is not the principle of existence. Okay. Whether an angel's power of intelligence is his essence. Okay, now we're bringing in something else. I know these first three articles are very closely related, even though they're saying separate things. We have substance, existence, active understanding, and then the power to understand. So, okay, we've ruled out the act itself. What about the power to act? Is that an angel's existence? Is that an angel's essence or substance? Dionysius calls angels intellects and minds. Therefore, an angel is his own power of intelligence. If an angel's power of intelligence is not his essence, then it is an accident. This would require an angel to not be a simple being, which contradicts earlier claims in this treatise. God made angelic nature like himself, while he made primary matter like nothing. Primary matter is its own power, therefore even more so is it the case in angels. Dionysius tells us that substance, power, and operation are distinct in angels. And every creature, again, we're coming back to it, just this is how creatures work. The creature's power is not the same as its essence. For angels, neither their understanding nor the operation of understanding are their essence. Maybe that should have been his. I don't know. We'll just leave it. Alright, objections answered. Angels are called intellects and minds because all their knowledge is intellectual, which, as you can see down here for Article 5, we'll dispute momentarily. A simple form that is not pure act can be the subject of accidents. Only God is a simple form without accidents. Okay? So, basically saying the premise of objection 2 is not correct. Number 3, that whole thing of primary matter being its own power is said because primary matter is pure potency. There's no comparison with angels. We're talking apples and oranges. Right? Number 4, whether there is active and passive intellect in the angel. Aristotle says that in every nature there is a passive and active intellect. Okay, I guess that would include angels. The passive intellect receives, the active enlightens. The angel receives enlightenment from a higher angel and enlightens a lower one. Kind of an interesting way to look at it, I guess. The distinction of passive and active intellect does not apply to angels. Why doesn't it apply to angels? Well, let's see. We have a passive and intellect, we meaning humans, because we understand sometimes only in potentiality, not actuality. This does not apply to angels who do not understand a thing sometimes potentially and sometimes actually. In other words, in us, our knowledge about a thing can shift from potency to act. That's not the case in angels. Either they understand something potentially or they understand it actually, and that's just the way it is. Not quite sure why, but we'll roll with it. And so in us, because of that ability to shift our understanding, we have passive and active intellect. Angels don't. This does not apply to angels because knowledge is not generated in them, but is present naturally. And then the active intellect does not enlighten another intellect, but things that are potentially intelligible. Therefore, the function described in the angels of passing on and receiving enlightenment is different than the passive and active intellect at discussion in the article, or at least that was my understanding. Probably flawed. Anyway, number 5, finally. Is there only intellectual knowledge in the angels? Well, we already kind of, spoiler alert, got the answer down here in this objections answered section of Article 3. Oh yeah, we'll just roll with it. Okay. Augustine says that in angels there is life which understands and feels. Therefore they have intellectual and sensitive knowledge. Isidore, I don't know if we heard from him before. It says that the angels learn by experience, and that goes beyond intellectual knowledge into the faculty of memory, which is different than pure intellect. Dionysius says that demons possess a perverted fantasy, which they spelled with a PH. Gotta like those old spellings sometimes. And fantasy belongs to the imaginative faculty, not the intellect. But St. Gregory says that man senses like beasts and understands like angels, implying that beasts don't understand and angels don't sense. Final argument. Because the angels are incorporeal, they have only intellectual powers. Aristotle confirms this, saying that beings like angels are separated into intellect and will. And our objections can be answered in two ways. Kind of groups them all together here. Number one, those three men all believed or were operating under the assumption that angels had bodies, which was kind of a game changer. Number two, we can still accept their words but take them as similitude for how angels actually are. Alright, coming up next time, the medium of angelic knowledge. So I think that's a nice short 3-article one, so I'll be back with that hopefully in a couple days. Until then, I'm Bandy Bono. I'll talk to you later.